All right, for those of you joining us, welcome, welcome. All right, so thank you everybody. My name is Dr. Breanna Beaupre, also known as Bree. I am your stream host for today. I'm also a board member of CrimCon, and this is our first ever virtual conference, so we're super excited. We've had over 300 presentation submissions, so that is an amazing turnout. Today, this panel will be going over psychopathic personality traits, intelligence, and mental health. And so just some, I guess, basic rules or what to expect. We'll be proceeding in the order of the program. Each presenter will have 10 minutes. And when you have a question, please ask it in the Q&A box and they will answer it together at the end. And so this is what it should look like on your end if you're an attendee. So again, make sure to ask questions here in the Q&A. And just remember to have fun today. So we started CrimCon to be a more fun and inclusive, accessible alternative, and I hope you enjoy it. So our first panelist, if you're ready, you can go ahead and share your screen.
Hello, my name is Breanna Clark, and along with Dr. Nedelec, we have been working on a study that examines the mediating effect of psychopathic personality traits on the relationship between childhood maltreatment and offending. And in this study, it was a genetically sensitive assessment, and we utilized a twin sample. So previous research has repeatedly found child abuse and neglect to be a powerful predictor of crime. Additionally, a link has been found between childhood maltreatment and scores on measures of psychopathy, like the Psychopathy Checklist Revised, or the PCLR. Additionally, numerous studies have found that there is a relatively strong and consistent relationship between psychopathy or psychopathic personality traits and criminal behavior. Each variable in this model has been shown to be impacted by genetic factors. Thus, any analysis of their associations should account for genetic factors or risk the possibility of confounding. Therefore, our research question is, to what extent is the association between maltreatment and offending mediated by psychopathic personality traits after accounting for shared genetic and shared non-genetic factors? To answer this question, we utilized private use data from waves 1, 3, and 4 of the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health, otherwise known as AdHealth. Now I'm going to be talking you through the variables that we used in our analysis. And in doing so, I'm also demonstrating the paths that we examined. So first we have our independent variable, which is childhood maltreatment. And this was a dichotomous measure of whether individuals reported being abused or neglected during childhood. It was obtained in wave 3 of data collection, and approximately 28% of respondents reported being maltreated. Next, we have our dependent variable, which is offending in adulthood. This is a measure of the average amount of offending respondents reported at wave 4. Questions refer to the year prior to data collection, so this variable measures offending in adulthood since respondents were all at least the age of 25. Now we're moving on to psychopathic personality traits, or PPT. And this index is a 23-item measure from wave 4, and it has been used by others utilizing the AdHealth data to examine psychopathy. It is important to note that this is not a diagnostic measure. However, it has been used repeatedly in the literature, and higher scores on this index indicate higher levels of PPT. So first, we're going to talk about the PPT between family effect. And this is the average score on the psychopathic personality traits measure per family. The average score for twins within a family, and it differentiates between families. And the coefficient associated with this measure is similar to your typical regression coefficient. Next is PPT within family effect. And this is a deviation score per twin from the mean for their family. It accounts for any differences between the twins on the psychopathy measure. It's the way in which the twins differ from that average that they both create. This variable is genetically informed, and it captures any shared genetic or shared non-genetic influence on PPT for the twins. So this illustrates the genetically sensitive effect on the association between childhood maltreatment and offending, with PPT being the mediator. We also included a number of relevant covariates, which include age, sex, race, socioeconomic status, zygosity, which is the term used to describe the genetic similarity or dissimilarity between twins. And we also included whether or not the pair is a different sex DZ twin pair, or in other words, whether or not the pair is a different sex fraternal twin pair. So for our analytical strategy, as has been demonstrated by the path we just discussed, and has been displayed here, we used a path analysis using structural equation modeling with a genetically sensitive component in terms of the psychopathy measure. And here we have our results. The solid black arrows show the statistically significant associations where we have a direct effect from childhood maltreatment to offending, and we have a mediating effect through the between family variable. And this replicates findings that we have seen in the past. However, the red path, as you can see by the statistics, illustrates a non-mediating effect. So in other words, what we're seeing here is that once we count for shared genetic and shared non-genetic factors within the PPT measure, the mediating effect of PPT on the relationship between childhood maltreatment and offending is gone. There is no longer any effect of psychopathy on the relationship between childhood maltreatment and offending. Our results indicate that there is a partial mediation, which is a replication on the twin subset sample of what we have seen in the overall AdHealth sample. However, with the genetically sensitive variable, the mediation is gone, and there is no longer an impact. So what this means is that to the extent that genetic and non-genetic factors influence variance on psychopathy, the effect of psychopathy is then gone in terms of its mediating effect. So once you have a genetically informed model, the overall mediation is removed. This illustrates that we need to account for shared genetic and shared non-genetic factors when we conduct these analyses. Otherwise, we're subject to confounding. So as with any study, there are limitations. So first, these are twins. So the extent to which these findings apply to singles, like singletons, is an empirical question that has an implication for generalization. Next, there could be a temporal order issue because PPT and offending were measured at the same wave. However, because our model was genetically sensitive, we are confident in our results. Lastly, the maltreatment variable that we used was retrospective in nature, so there's always the possibility that there could be measurement error there. So nonetheless, keeping these limitations in mind, this analysis does illustrate that there's a potential for confounding if we do not take into account the genetic and non-genetic factors that are shared within families. Thank you for your time.
Great job. Thank you. So our next panelist, you can go ahead and start whenever you are ready.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Holly Lonergan, and my advisor, Dr. Nedelec, and I were originally going to assess schizophrenic symptomology. However, we ended up in a bit of an IRB data request black hole. So we had to switch gears a little bit and so we were unable to get the data in time for our original project. So we decided to assess the moderating effect of treatment services on youth psychopathy and offending instead. I'm going to start by drawing a little bit from the treatment literature here. The treatment literature suggests that when a program is evidence-based and correctly implemented, an offender's criminal behavior will reduce and other, quality of life outcomes will increase. However, sometimes agencies may take a more general responsivity approach rather than a specific responsivity approach. So this could be an instance where an offender would be matched to treatment just based on their total risk score or county resources, rather than matching an offender to a program that is more suitable to their learning style, cognitive abilities, motivations, or other individual differences that could affect their treatment completion. We know one of the most criminogenic individual differences is psychopathy. So while psychopathy could be a potentially more serious individual difference, we wanted to assess how treatment may interact with offenders that do present with these characteristics, which brings us to our research question. So do treatment services moderate the relationship between youth psychopathy and general offending? So I do want to note here that although we are displaying our question in a path diagram format, it's a path figure, and we are actually using the OLS regression with an interaction term instead. To assess this question, we are utilizing the public version baseline data set of the Pathways to Desistance project. The measures within our data that we selected were youth psychopathy. So this is the total score on the youth psychopathy checklist. Total scores typically range from 0 to 40, but in our analytic sample, they ranged from 0 to a max of 39. Our dependent variable is the proportion of general offending that took place within the last 6 months. So this, in our analytic sample, this ranges from 0 to 0.91, and was created by dividing the number of general offenses that happened in the last 6 months by the total number of offenses that the youth had reported to commit. And finally, our moderator variable is treatment services. So this variable is coded as 0, no treatment services at all in the last 6 months, and 1 as at least 1 treatment service in the last 6 months. These services include seeing a psychiatrist, a community, individual, group, or home-based service, or school service. We also controlled for relevant covariates, but for time, they're not listed here. As you recall, our analysis is OLS with a series of those regressions that includes an interaction term. It is not structural equation modeling. We also produce a linear prediction model of offending using margins and stata, which I will go over. And I do have the stepwise regression coefficients if anyone is interested, but for time, I'm going to skip right to displaying the effects on the linear prediction plot. So here is the plot. So this plot displays the effect of at least 1 treatment in the last 6 months in predicting the score on the offending measure across each score on the youth psychopathy youth version checklist using an analytic sample of 1,250. So the x-axis at the bottom of the screen is the youth psychopathy total scores ranging from 0 to 39. And on the y-axis, it's the linear prediction of offending. So you'll also see the circles that are plotted here are the point estimates from that prediction, and then the bars represent the 95% confidence intervals. You can see on the left side of the plot here, the confidence intervals include 0, which would indicate statistical non-significance. But I do want to draw your attention to this shaded red area here. Although it looks like it is touching 0 or includes 0, it's not, it's just very close. So this is the first point in our estimates that would indicate a statistical significance. And then if we also look at this point here, the gap gets a little bit more noticeable, And you can see that it now really does not include 0. So the gap is getting bigger for that statistical significance. And this is about around a 17 and 18 score on the youth psychopathy, where those treatment effects really begin to differ. This would indicate that there is a slight moderation effect across different levels of that, or different scores of that youth psychopathy measure. So to conclude here, we see that there is an interaction or moderation effect between treatment services and different levels of psychopathy. If we want to speculate a little bit here, it's possible that we are seeing an increase of offending as the outcome, because of the youth participating in maybe ineffective services or services that aren't evidence-based or informed or include components of effective correctional programming. In light of these findings, agencies should continue to drive efforts to match an offender with treatment that is most conducive to their responsiveness factor as well as their individual criminogenic needs. I do want to note 3 important limitations. The first being our study only utilized the sample from 2 research sites, so it's possible that the results may not be generalizable to a larger population. Second, the analysis was only a snapshot of the effects within a 6-month period. It was not over the life course. We also did not have access to specific service information like program characteristics or frequency of attendance. To remedy these limitations, future research should examine program qualities to determine if there is a specific program that may produce these particular effects. And also of interest could be conducting a longitudinal analysis. And this could potentially determine if the effect is consistent over the life course or over a longer period of time, rather than just the 6 short-month period, with using a more nationally representative sample. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Now we're ready for number 3.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karli Province. This project I'm doing with Dr. Nedelec and Dr. Barnes at the University of Cincinnati in the School of Criminal Justice. And our project is on psychopathy, IQ, and educational attainment. Generally speaking, different measures of mental health, cognitive function, and personality have been researched with educational attainment and are well established in literature. However, when we're looking specifically at psychopathy and intelligence, they have both been independently linked to educational attainment, but little research has assessed the pathways linking psychopathy and intelligence with educational attainment in adulthood. So this leads me to my research question. So the current study examines the mediating effects of verbal intelligence with PPT and educational attainment. My sample uses the data from the National Longitudinal Study of Adolescent to Adult Health. This data set has 5 separate stages of data collection. However, I am using wave 1, wave 4, and wave 5. Starting with wave 1, my MV mediation variable is verbal IQ, and my CV control variables are age, race, and parental education. Wave 4, my IV independent variable is psychopathic personality traits. And last, wave 5, my DV, my dependent variable, is educational attainment. And the analytical data set was reduced to missingness on all 3 variables. The analytical model uses path analysis with structural equation modeling to investigate whether verbal IQ mediates the relationship between PPT with educational attainment, controlling for parental education, age, and race. The results are also shown separately for males and females. There's a body of literature that suggests that PPT measured in a variety of ways behaves differently for males and females. In the next few slides, I will talk about how I measured my variables, starting with PPT. Like others have said, a formal measure of P, like the PCLR, is not available in AdHealth. So we do have a measure, however, of the Big Five personality items, which has been used to measure psychopathic personality traits in prior research for a variety of outcomes. So we just follow previous research there. We use 23 items to create a sum index. This index is a continuous measure where higher values of BPT indicate higher levels of psychopathic personality traits. Next, the mediator verbal intelligence was measured from the standardized score of the picture vocabulary test. The lowest IQ recorded was 14, with the highest being 146. The educational attainment measure is measured into one single variable with 15 different categories, with the lowest indicating 8th grade or less, and then all the way to completing a doctorate. Last, we have the control variables: age, race, and parental education. The parent or guardian in most cases in the AdHealth is the mother. She reported her educational level, and that of the child's residential father in most cases is the biological father. Education scores here ranged from 8th grade or less to all the way to beyond a 4-year college or university degree. So starting with males, generally we see that we have a partially mediated model, since the direct paths from PPT to educational attainment is significant. Looking first at the path from PPT to educational attainment, we see that for every 1 unit increase in PPT results in a 0.19 decrease in educational attainment. Looking at the path from PPT to verbal intelligence, we see a beta of negative 0.13. So for every 1 unit increase in PPT results in a 0.13 decrease in verbal IQ. And the last path, verbal IQ to educational attainment, we see that higher verbal IQ results in higher values of educational attainment. These stories, so the coefficients and the betas for females do not change in a significant way. So the story is almost the same, where we see a partially mediated model, since the direct paths from PPT to educational attainment remain the same. And so this suggests that verbal intelligence accounts for some unexplained variance in the association between PPT and educational attainment for males and females, controlling for race, age, and parental education on average. Generally, there's a preconception that psychopaths are extremely smart, but that may not always be the case. So I believe it's important to get at looking at individual differences. And in some, psychopathy predicts educational attainment, in part due to its association with IQ. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you. Now we can move on to number 4.
Just a second. I'm messing with the settings here.
You're good. You're good on time.
I will rejoin in 1 second. I think that makes me quit Zoom. You asked now to change the setting here.
Do you have a Mac?
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll make you sign out of Zoom and then change your privacy settings. So.
Well, this is terrible. I'll be back in 1 minute.
You're good. No worries. Attendees, feel free to ask questions throughout. And I will say great job so far. You presented some high-level statistics very accessibly, so great job. So while we wait, we could take a question now. So Holly, what was the effect of the treatment service on offending in the non-interaction model?
Do you mean the like coefficient wise? I guess. Let me bring it up.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me see. Should I just share my screen, or should I?
You could. We have, we're good on time.
With the. Okay. Let's see. So with service on offending and then non-interaction. Okay. I guess share. Okay, so this is the path diagram from the effects of treatment services on general offending. So it's very small, but contrary to what we would expect, is actually positive, which would mean that as treatment if they did receive a treatment in the last 6 months, they actually had an increased amount of offending, which is non-consistent with, I guess, some of the treatment literature. But if we did want to speculate, maybe it could be because that these treatment services aren't actually R&R based. So therefore, they did produce different effects. But I mean, we would definitely look into it a little bit more for types of treatment to see if there are specific treatments that produce this effect or do have the opposite effect. But like I said, we do not have treatment program quality, so it was difficult for us to really look specifically at what these treatment services were made up of to produce that outcome.
Interesting. Okay, so if there's any follow-up questions, feel free to ask in the Q&A, but I'm going to turn it over to panelist number 4 now.
Sultan, you're muted.
Yes. Oof. A lot of technological issues.
You're good.
I think, am I good now?
You're good.
Okay. Oh, man, this is going to be recorded for all to see. This is terrible. All right. Let me gather myself. So the project I'm presenting on today is titled Thinking About Crime, and it's essentially looking at how different types, different engagement in offending types can mediate the relationship between intelligence and arrest. So there's a pretty robust literature out there about the relationship, the association between intelligence and arrest. Namely, this literature shows that a higher intelligence is associated negatively with arrest. I kind of want to get at what is the mechanism here that links these two variables. One potential explanation for this is that intelligence is related to offending, so higher intelligence, lower offending, and obviously offending itself would be more likely to cause arrest, so you would see that association bear out through this relationship. And to be clear here, from now on, I'm going to use these boxing gloves to represent aggressive offending or offending with a victim present, and then the person with the money bag to represent property offending or offending where a person is not present, and therefore differentiating which one is more likely to get caught based on clearance rates. And then intelligence by the head and arrest by the cuffs. So this is one of the proposed mechanisms, but research shows that this is inconsistent across samples and is sometimes nonlinear, which kind of tie in together actually by a study in 2013 found that the relationship between intelligence and offending is not linear. And as you can see on the screen by the two circles, somewhat circles, that depending on which subsample you take from there, you might get a different relationship than the whole sample or either side. So another explanation is the differential apprehension hypothesis, which states that higher intelligence helps you elude apprehension after committing offense, which then in turn leads to a reduced chance of arrest. Again, I ask, but how? What is the mechanism there? What's going on to lead to differential apprehension? So part of what I was thinking is that intelligence may lead to different offending types based on risk. Therefore, you're less likely to commit an offense that's risky, less likely to arouse suspicion or get apprehended, and then leading to arrest or criminal justice system involvement. So this leads me right into my research question. The first one is intelligence related to different types of offending. Again, the boxing glove, aggressive, or where a victim is present, and then property offending is the person holding the money. These are the only icons I could find on PowerPoint. And then how does this relationship account for the association between intelligence and arrest? So how does that work in the big picture? So the first hypothesis is that intelligence is positively related to property offending because it's less risky and other things like that through the literature. And the second hypothesis is that intelligence is negatively associated with aggressive offending. And to tie it all in, that's the whole model. Assuming that offending leads to arrest, we can find positive errors on the right-hand side of that model. 2 samples were used in the current study to get at all those issues I talked about earlier in the literature, the pathways to the assistance sample and the ed health sample. For measures, intelligence was measured through the WASI scale in the pathways data and through the Peabody picture vocabulary in the ed health. I've listed the individual offenses below for both property and aggressive. And these are the ones I picked because they overlap across both data sets. And then finally, arrest was self-reported in the ed health, and official data was used in the pathways. So because the pathways has many waves, I use latent growth curve analysis to estimate an intercept and slope for offending, each type of offending, and for arrest. And then I used a path model both for the pathways and ed health, where the intercepts and slopes were used as the mediators. And in the ed health, I used wave 2 for intelligence, wave 3 for offending, and wave 4 for arrest. So going to the results, as you can see on the left-hand side in the pathways, intelligence was positively related to property offending, but not aggressive offending. And then in the ed health, we found basically what we expected. This gets a bit more interesting when looking at the indirect paths. There was a positive indirect path in the pathways between intelligence and arrest through property offending, and a negative one in the ed health through aggressive offending. Interestingly, property offending in the ed health did not relate to arrest, and in the pathways, intelligence was not related to aggressive offending. And maybe even more interesting is in the pathways in the red, you see the sum of the indirect path is no longer significant. That is aggregating both the indirect paths I have there, property and aggressive, and then the direct path is not significant, kind of showing something interesting that I'll get into in a little bit. But in the ed health, they were all still significant, both the indirect and the sum of the indirect, partially because of one of the indirect paths was so small, it didn't offset the other one as in the ed pathways. So my main takeaways is that intelligence perhaps is differentially related to different types of offending. It could be due to the sample used, it does vary across samples, and it may not be linear. And finally, different engagement in different types of crimes can mediate that relationship between intelligence and arrest. And perhaps most importantly, aggregating offending, such as aggressive and property, may cause some issues when looking at the results. As we saw in the pathways, there was no longer a direct effect if they were aggregated. And regarding the implications, better specification of the causal process of intelligence on any outcome, really. And regarding offending, further research on the differential etiology of offense types would probably bear some fruit. And finally, developmentally informed juvenile justice system in general might take into account these factors such as intelligence that may cause people to behave differently depending on their levels. And thank you for your time.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm going to open it up to Q&A now. So feel free, attendees, to ask your questions in the Q&A. I will say I liked the use of icons to show your statistical results. Thought that was awesome.
Bree, I'll just jump in here. I will say I asked all my students after watching your video about changing PowerPoint stuff up to have more figures, more pictures and stuff like that, and fewer tables. So
Nice.
So
Awesome.
that helped out a lot there. Thanks a lot.
Awesome. Good. I'm glad it was helpful. I took a training by Echo Rivera. She's on Twitter. If you're interested, I learned all about effective presenting and using visuals from her. So I highly recommend checking out her stuff. I'll try to put a link in the chat.
Yeah, I saw that on your stuff, and I got stuck in a pretty good loophole there looking at her thing. So it was really great. Thanks.
Nice. Cool. Is there any way to access the recording of this panel? Yep. So everything's being recorded and it will be uploaded to YouTube sometime in early December.
I have a quick question, if I may. Sultan, I'm not sure if you covered it, but or maybe it was quick, but I'm not sure. Could you explain why you used the two different samples, that you used both pathways and the ad health, just to clarify?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Dr. Nedelec. Well, in the literature, intelligence and offending was not really consistent, and it did vary by sample. So beyond just like generalizability concerns and anything like that, looking at them across samples could, I thought, maybe address some of that inconsistencies that could arise. Hope that was a clear answer.
Yeah. For people who don't know, the pathways is adjudicated youth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and the ad health is it's community. So you can see if these findings are occurring in the different samples. Yeah.
Sultan, did you try OT estimate? I think it's to estimate a nonlinear relationship path between IQ and the different offending types?
Darn it, Ian, with the tough questions. So I submitted this, and someone actually said that which led me to actually look at the nonlinear paths. And from what I remember, I think I dropped that idea. It was, I think, significant, but it was I did the latent growth curve model, but the variance in that was much smaller, so I couldn't explain as much, if that makes any sense. Although it was significant, the latent growth curve model didn't really show much there for me to look at. So there was justification, I guess, for both, but it made sense for me to go with a linear model. But that makes a lot of sense since some studies show it to be nonlinear.
Great. And I like this next question for each of you. What were the most surprising results from your studies?
I'll go. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I think the most interesting result was the path from PPT to verbal IQ, that it was significant. I think that deserves a little bit more of a look. I think that there might be a neurological explanation there. Definitely interesting to me. So that's something I'm considering looking further into in the future.
And that question's for each of you. So feel free to answer. What were the most surprising or interesting results from your studies?
Bree and Holly are not surprised by anything.
They predicted it all.
Oh, they're good fortune tellers.
I guess I'll answer that also along with Karli. For me, the a surprising part was those two indirect paths across the samples differed, but in the pathways, when you aggregate them, it the indirect path disappears. So if you were to just look at the association between intelligence and arrest through offending mediated by offending, you would and kudos to Ian for also asking the question about this. You would probably not find anything. Maybe if you looked at nonlinear paths, you might, but you probably not find anything because the paths were opposing. One path was positive, one path was negative. Even though one of them was not significant, it was enough to offset the path that I did find enough when you sum them up. I hope I'm not speaking in jargon, or I hope I'm making sense.
Ian says a suppression effect.
Perfectly worded, Ian. Yes, I guess.
All right. Anyone else want to share interesting or surprising? If not, I'll move on to the next question.
I guess I'll share. What I found kind of most interesting was how early on, or how low, I guess, on the psychopathy scale that these treatment effects started to show. Typically, the cutoff score is 30 for that diagnosed aspect of psychopathy, but much earlier does it start to actually have those personality characteristics start to actually have an effect with treatment. So I guess it would probably be important to really consider those individual differences and characteristics when administering treatment, and not just focus on whether they meet that 30 mark or not on that scale.
I can go ahead and answer my part of the question, I guess, for that too. I've done a study similar to this one before, utilizing the entire AdHealth sample for the public use data. And I found it interesting that when using this genetically informed model, that the results were so similar to what I'd found in the past, even utilizing the private use twin sample. And I also found it interesting that once you accounted for the genetically sensitive variable, the mediation effect was essentially gone. So that was what I thought.
Awesome. So Anonymous asks, do you think the relationship between intelligence and offending could also vary from area to area?
That's an excellent question. So the pathways, like someone stated, is in just two places, Philadelphia and Maricopa County, both places that we've heard a lot about recently. So yeah, I guess I did control for area in that sample, and the AdHealth is more generalizable across the country. Yeah, so I guess between intelligence and offending, I don't know about between intelligence and offending, maybe between intelligence and arrest, where some places are more, maybe more likely to arrest you if they catch you, like maybe a suburb versus a city or something. But between intelligence and offending, I can't really say why I would think there is. I can't really, I don't know. I wouldn't think there is, but maybe.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next one. Did you find any link between intelligence and attractiveness? And if so, does that play a role in less arrests due to police discretion?
That's another really good question. I did not look into attractiveness. I know I think someone on this panel may have looked at that, but link between intelligence and attractiveness. Yeah,
So
so
you wouldn't be able to do it in the pathways. I don't think they have a measure of attractiveness in the pathways. They do in the health,
right.
but you didn't. Yeah, you didn't have that.
I could see how that could affect the relationship between intelligence, I guess, and arrest. So maybe you mean controlling for that, but I don't see how it could affect offending. Yeah, that's a good question. I guess if intelligence or sorry, attractiveness accounts for some of that relationship, then maybe I should throw it in as a control variable. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't know to answer your question. I throw a lot of I don't knows out there. Haven't looked into it, but yeah, it's plausible.
Great. Well, if there are no other questions, I will go ahead and wrap up the session. I would like to thank the panelists very much for your presentations. They were excellent, so great job. And if you're looking to attend the next session on this stream, I'm going to close out the link and then reopen it. So click back on our website to come back. And thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Bree. Great job
Thank you.
with the session. Great job, you guys.
Bye. Have a great day.
You too. Good luck.
Thanks.